I remember when the trailers for X-Men were shown on television, it automatically threw me off guard, as I could never imagine any other comic book property that wasn't Batman that would get this type of treatment. But at the same time, I was a little disappointed by the decisions that were shown, like the fact that the characters were not wearing their traditional outfits that I remember watching from the 90s animated series. But it became something I slowly grew to appreciate as the years went on, mostly because of the time that it came out. X-Men was released in America on July 14, 2000, a time where comic book-based properties were still risky, especially after the critical and financial disasters of Joe Schumacher's Batman and Robin, where its over-the-top campy style made it seem impossible for moviegoers to take superhero movies seriously. While we did have Blade a year later, it wasn't enough to boost people's interest in the genre again, because while Blade was indeed a property associated with Marvel, the character was relatively unknown by the general public prior to the film's release, so many would probably dismiss it as a completely original film starring Wesley Snipes. X-Men, on the other hand, was a big-name comic book property, so the filmmakers knew certain changes had to be made to make a huge impression on the public, like grounding it into reality, and as I've mentioned, changing the original costumes to something that's more uniformly. Despite these changes, they were able to stay true to the core theme of the original source material, with its themes of prejudice and bigotry of those who were naturally born different with special unique abilities. And it worked, as it made nearly 300 million worldwide at the box office, and was met with good word of mouth from critics, which would inevitably pave the way for other studios to take a chance at these properties, for better or for worse, as well as starting a franchise that lasted for 20 years, especially without having a fully reboot. Until recently, that is. Before I continue, I would like to briefly touch on the plot synopsis. Senator Robert Kelly wanted to pass on a Mutant Registration Act that would force mutants to reveal themselves to the world, to which a mutant named Eric Lyncher, aka Magneto, will do whatever he can to prevent it. He does this by having two of his mutant henchmen, Mystique and Toad, kidnap the Senator to test a machine that will turn a human's gene into mutants. The machine worked, as Kelly was able to use his newfound mutation to escape. Meanwhile, a 17-year-old mutant named Marie, who changed her name into Rogue, ran away from home after finding out she has the mutation to absorb other people's energy when she accidentally puts her boyfriend into a coma by kissing him. She meets a mutant named Logan, aka Wolverine, who possesses healing abilities and an adamantium skeleton with claws that protrude through his knuckles. They happen to be attacked by another one of Magneto's associates, Sabretooth, until they were saved by Cyclops and Storm and were taken to a mansion owned by Professor Charles Xavier, a former associate to Magneto. Xavier believes that Magneto has taken an interest in Wolverine and tries to keep Logan out of Magneto's hands, but it was soon later revealed that he actually wanted Rogue so that he can transfer his powers to her to test the machine after it nearly killed him when he uses it on Senator Kelly, not realizing that there is a side effect to the machine as Kelly's body was rejecting the mutation, causing him to become completely liquid. So it is up to the X-Men to save Rogue and stop Magneto so the rest of humanity won't suffer the same fate. The X-Men were a huge part of my early childhood, along the likes of other comic-based characters like Batman, Superman, or Spider-Man. And like many who was born in the early 90s, my earliest memories comes from watching the animated series on Fox Kids, which aired from 1992 to 1997. And while it's a cliche to say that Wolverine was my favorite out of all the X-Men, he did become my favorite out of all the characters in the Marvel Universe growing up. That is, until Frank Castle came along to the picture. I had a few figures here and there, and I owned the infamous PlayStation version of X-Men Treasure of the Atoms, which just so happens to be my very first video game. So it was by no surprise that I was indeed excited when learning that a movie was coming out, despite my initial reactions to some of the choices that were made. As a kid, I really enjoyed it, but it became something I lost interest in as the years went on. A lot of that could be summed up by the fact that it was followed up by a vastly superior sequel that still remains as one of my all-time favorite superhero films, and that we've been getting other more successful superhero movies over time. And while the series itself had a few missteps along the way, it was able to make a comeback by delivering some of the best the series had ever had to offer, which further makes the original feel pretty dated as the years went on. That is in large part that the first X-Men movie is a Kickstarter for things to come, and it's a decent one at that, but it doesn't make it a great movie as a whole. Now, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have anything to say. As I previously stated, it does stick with the core theme of what the X-Men represents, about prejudice and bigotry of people who were born different with these special unique abilities. And a perfect example of this is what happened in the beginning with Eric Lyncher, a young Magneto, when Nazis have taken his family away, as it gives us a great idea and understanding of where he's coming from. Therefore, it makes us sympathize with our antagonists, which is unfortunately the less I could say about Professor Charles Xavier, and with the exception of Wolverine and Rogue, all the X-Men, pretty much. Now, since this is the first movie, this may not be a big issue, and since this is a movie that's based off of a team, not every character is going to have some development. However, there is an extended version of this movie that almost kind of makes me wish this was a director's cut of some kind called X-Men 1.5, where there are extended scenes and conversation that kind of helps develop some of the characters, particularly with Cyclops and Jean. And those scenes are available on YouTube. And if you have the VHS, you could actually watch it in the after credits. The Brotherhood, with the exception of Magneto, of course, gets even less development, as they are more treated as villain henchmen rather than actual characters in their own right. Again, since this is the first film, it wouldn't be a problem, except the fact that you got half of the characters in the team, half of the members pretty much gets killed off. That is, of course, Sabretooth and Code. And it's kind of a shame, at least with Sabretooth, because you would have actually have time to develop his and Wolverine's dynamic rivalry, but we never see any of that, so that's unfortunate. While Mystique didn't get much development in this movie, we at least get a little bit of her character when she kidnaps the senator and tells her that because of people like him, she was afraid to go to school when she was a child, so at least there's something there on that part. Down to the positives, well, I would say that most of the characters are well cast. I mean, it comes without any surprise to anyone's mind that Patrick Stewart would be a great Professor Charles Xavier, and it certainly helped with the film's success. Hugh Jackman, who has never read comics, became a huge fan of Wolverine overnight. That he said that at one point he wanted to do a solo Wolverine movie that focuses on his time in Japan and the Japan story by Chris Claremont and drawn by Frank Miller, which he happily gets to do in the second Wolverine film he did, The Wolverine. Most of the other acting does fine, although I'm not too crazy on Halle Berry Storm, and while I really do like James Marsden in the role as Cyclops, he unfortunately never gets a chance to shine, which is a shame because he is supposed to be the team's leader. And this is something that gets worse as the films went on. No matter how dated this movie is, I still have a huge appreciation for it, because without it, we wouldn't be living in the realm where we get more of these successful comic book based properties that are translated into movies. Hell, we probably won't even get live action series that we've been getting on Disney Plus without the first X-Men movie. Now, as I mentioned, we did have Blade, but X-Men was the first in terms of its popularity to be successful, to show that superhero movies can be taken seriously and they don't have to be played for laughs like we had with the atrocious Batman and Robin. So for that, no matter how I feel about it over time, I've always remained to have a soft spot for it because of what it did for the genre.